Test 1, 2.
Okay, it seems that we managed to fix the problem. So I suggest we start. I'm very glad to welcome all the participants to this joint IACA-SIGA joint event on integrity and anti-corruption in sport. I very much hope that at the end of this event we'll be able to identify some practical action that IACA and SIGA, but also international community at large, could take in order to promote integrity in sport. Before we go to the discussion on today's topic, let me say just a few words about IACA and its role in promoting integrity in sport. First of all, let me observe that IACA supports the full implementation of the UNCAC and delivers anti-corruption education and training to public and private sector professionals and practitioners. It also delivers such activities to academics, media professionals, and civil society organizations. The need to fight corruption and promote compliance in sport is becoming ever more important on the international anti-corruption agenda. To illustrate this, let me refer to the political declaration of the 2021 special session of the United Nations General Assembly against Corruption. In this document, the member states declared safeguarding sport from corruption as one of their major goals. Moreover, the CoSP has already adopted 2 resolutions on this matter, namely in 2017 on corruption in sport and in 2019 on safeguarding sport from corruption. IACA is willing to join forces with the international sport community and share its knowledge and expertise in anti-corruption and compliance to enhance effectiveness and efficiency of integrity and compliance programs in countries and sports organizations. Utilizing our global expertise in anti-corruption education and capacity building, IACA is ready to offer tailor-made trainings on anti-corruption and compliance in sport for various stakeholders. In 2023, so not long ago, IACA also started a research project on integrity and anti-corruption compliance in sport. The aim of this project, or the aims of this project, are to identify main corruption risks and typologies of corruption misconduct in various sports, and develop overview of best practices in promoting integrity, implementing anti-corruption compliance management systems, and whistleblower hotlines in international and national sports organizations, professional leagues, and clubs. If you want to know more about what IACA does in the area of promoting compliance in sport and generally about the IACA activities, please refer to the information material which is displayed at the back of the room. Please take as many copies as you wish. Now, in today's event, the speakers from IACA and SIGA will share best practices and innovative ideas on promoting integrity and anti-corruption in sport. Let me briefly introduce the panel members. So to my right, we have Mr. Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini, who is the chair of SIGA, and in addition, Italian magistrate and co-chair of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. To my left, we have Professor Andy Spalding, the member of the IACA's faculty and professor at the University of Richmond School of Law. And to my further right, we have Mr. Emanuel Macedo de Medeiros, the global CEO of SIGA. I very much regret that due to reasons beyond our control, Ms. Katie Simmons, the global COO of SIGA and the managing director of SIGA Women, could not join us today. A few words about the organization of our panel. I'm intending to ask all the panelists to address 3 major questions which we identify prior to this event. They will deal with issues such as trends of corruption and other crimes in sport, with strategies or best practices from promoting integrity in sport, and with actions that can be taken to promote integrity and fighting corruption in sport. Each panelist will have around 3 minutes to address each of the 3 questions, and the questions will be discussed consecutively. We also plan a 10-15 minutes Q&A session at the end, and I would encourage all the people gathered in the room to be actively participating in this part of the debate. So without further ado, let me address the first question. And the question is, and I would like Mr. Polcini to start, what are the modern trends of corruption and other crimes in sport, and which areas and relationships are more vulnerable for corruption and related crimes in sport? Giovanni, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Just since the first time I take the floor, and before answering your question, let's say a few words on the relevance for the Sporting Integrity Global Alliance, of which I am independent chair, of the opportunity to stay in the Conference of the State Party of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, officially invited to participate with the International Anti-Corruption Academy in a side event. And in this particular time, I remember the memory of our first chair, President Franco Frattini, whose legacy is our inspiration day by day in the efforts we are conducting in preventing fighting against corruption in sport. Just another really little point, I am the former chair of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group. Since the 1st of December of this year, the presidency of Brazil has the responsibility of this primary multilateral fora, co-chaired by the France. I now go to answer to your question very quickly. First, corruption and related crimes have cast a shadow over various aspects of sport. Among the most vulnerable areas and relationships within a sporting world, illegal betting stands out as a significant concern with the potential to manipulate outcomes. In the past weeks, we have registered scandals of illegal betting, so relevant. And if I may also add something to the technical reference, we have to consider that we are assisting to the involvement of young athletes, young professional athletes in a scandal of illegal betting. We have to take into due account this factor. Match fixing follows closely as it compromises the integrity of competitions. Doping scandals have plagued the sporting arena, tarnishing the achievements of athletes. Disturbance of public procurements can lead to misuse of funds, while corruption in major public events adjudications raises questions about fairness and transparency. Addressing these vulnerabilities, it is essential to preserving the spirit of credibility of sport. On the other hand, we have to take into due account the modern trends of corruption and other crimes in sports, and they represent, in my opinion, a global concern. Organized crime's involvement in sporting world has become increasingly prevalent in many countries. I can, for diplomatic rules, speak about my country. And I can refer to Italy and the Italian experience, but please believe me, it is a global threat. Probably Italy has lived this kind of threat in past, experimenting also the modality to react to. And I go to close the answer to your first question. We have evidences that all the Italian criminal groups has demonstrated interest to infiltrate the sport industry at multiple levels. The criminal activities are growing also internationally, necessitating a concerted effort to combat corruption and crime within the realm of sports on a global scale.
Thank you very much. And the same question goes to Mr. Spalding. Andy, your 3 minutes start now.
Thank you very much, and great to be here. I appreciate that the overview, Mr. Polcini, and I would like to add to it by exploring other crimes that are closely related with corruption crimes and that are increasingly endemic in mega sports, and that constitute both a challenge and an opportunity in the coming years as we try to tackle them. In particular, I'd like to talk about the convergence of corruption and various crimes related to human rights, particularly human trafficking, both labor and sex. These forms of misconduct, these crimes, are converging both at the level of the misconduct and also at the level of the remedy. A lot of the approaches that we have to take to address these problems are closely related. There's much overlap between them. There's synergy between them. They're converging now, I think, in a very powerful way. The bribery problem in mega sports, as we many of us appreciate already, originates in 1998, really, with the Salt Lake City bribery scandal. This was the first mega sport event where there was hard proof of bribes paid to win votes in relation to getting the event. And since then, of course, as we all well appreciate, we've had a series of corruption scandals and a rising narrative of corruption in mega sports, which may have reached a high point in the middle part of the last decade, both as events in various countries exposed corruption problems, and then in 2015 with the FIFA indictments from the U.S. Department of Justice. And suddenly, business-related corruption in mega sports became very obvious. Meanwhile, the migrant labor problem really has started receiving attention in the last 10 years or so. We associate that problem now with the most recent World Cup in Qatar, but lest anyone think that issue was one and done, I know another country that has migrant labor problems. Let me give you a hint. You're sitting in it now. The United States has serious problems with immigrant labor, both legal and illegal. What are their protections? What are their rights? What are the conditions in which they work? This is an issue that in the United States we don't talk about a lot. We talk about migrant labor as a border control problem, as an immigration problem, but not as a labor rights problem very much. And not to mention the United States, as we've recently learned, is going to be hosting 3 mega sporting events in the next 11 years. The 2026 FIFA Men's World Cup, co-hosted with Canada and Mexico, the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, and now almost certainly the 2034 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. And so it's notable to me that the city that really was the birthplace of the modern corruption in mega sports narrative, Salt Lake City, will now be hosting the event again, and perhaps will give us the time to complete the circle and to adopt meaningful reforms that we all would like to see in place. Notice that these are both, in very large part, corporate problems. They're problems that exist in the corporate sector. Bribery, of course, largely occurs to the intersection of companies seeking to do mega sport related work and governing bodies who have the authority to award contracts. At the same time, on the human trafficking side, labor trafficking is largely a business problem. Sex trafficking has a different character to it. But if these are both business-related problems, the remedy also lies in the business sector, and we'll talk about that.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker on this point is Mr. Macedo de Medeiros. Emanuel.
Thank you, Jarek. And hello again to my dear fellow panel colleagues and to the audience that is following us here, as well as the others that are following us via social media. And I know that they are in abundant number. Allow me to say a few words about what brings me here and who I am and what I am inexorably, irreversibly committed to safeguard the integrity of sport. I stand here today after 30 years of my first election as an executive of a Premier League football club. I am a lawyer by trade. I am Portuguese by birth, citizen of the world by accident. But if there is something that I'm really committed, is to contribute to overcome adversities and transform them into opportunities of success, doing what is in my reach. I am one of the founding fathers of the European leagues, an umbrella body that brings together 40 professional leagues across Europe, more than 1,000 clubs. An organization that is responsible for 90% of football's earnings, more than FIFA, more than UEFA, more than the Olympics altogether. I was also the founding father and the CEO, always elected, because legitimacy for me is unconditional, of the World League Association. I have had roles in FIFA and UEFA. I had bridged cooperation between the European Union and sport. I have done many things in my life. Today, every day is dedicated to pursue the mission and the vision and the purpose of this global, independent, neutral coalition that is called Sport Integrity Global Alliance. Because we believe in sport. We believe in sport's merits. We believe in this social, irreplaceable social function. And because we understand that sport is at siege, is under threat. And organized crime, corruption, money laundering, tax evasion are just some of the threats that are increasingly complex, increasingly sophisticated, global in the dimension, and that also increasingly involve transnational organized crime. I could tell you how we got here. I could tell you about the poor governance, the poor regulation, the lax attitude by sports governing bodies, governments, regulators, and even law enforcement. I could tell you about this misperception that I hear and I see and I witness everywhere, including here, that corruption in sport is less socially damaging than corruption in other sectors. Until we wake up, until we acknowledge that we cannot leave any sector in the dark, vulnerable, exposed to criminal infiltration, unscrupulous individuals, and transnational organized crime, we are not doing our job. We are doing them a favor. And that has a brutal impact on our lives, the lives of the citizens of the world, those who are passionate about sport, and the companies and our institutions and democracy itself. So we need to understand that. The vulnerabilities are obviously related to the poor governance, the poor regulation, the lack of oversight, the lack of scrutiny. We can see this from the governance. We are witnessing these latest developments within the sport movement, attempts to perpetuate leaders at the helm of sports organizations beyond the term limits. We also see everything that is related with financial transactions and how vulnerable, ladies and gentlemen, how vulnerable and exposed sport is, including number one sport, which is football. There was at the end of last year more than 200 investment funds active in European football, or soccer, as you say in America. Who are those investment funds? Who are the ultimate beneficial owners? What are their motivations? Where's the money coming to? Where's the money going to? Who is the middleman? Who exerts supervision? Who exerts scrutiny? It is a boat in flames. It is beyond control because we continue to navel-gaze and we continue to window dress. So, players transfers and the related transactions have been skyrocketing. I have the figures and I can share with you. Agents' commissions, club ownership, where there is no scrutiny on the ultimate beneficial owners, commercial arrangements, sponsorship deals, and other commercial relationships that are done without tender process, without scrutiny, without control. The list could go on and on. Discrimination, racism, xenophobia, lack of equality, lack of female participation, for example, or race diversity. And I'm glad that to see in this room so many women and so many diverse and inclusive individuals and organizations. The list goes on and on, But let us not forget sports betting integrity. A sector, sports betting, that represents probably $5 trillion US a year. Just in New York, last month, you had 2.15 bets in sport, 1 month. Now you can measure the scale of the problem, the dimension, and how deep goes the rabbit hole. But if we are not united, if we are not committed to action, if we prefer words than achievements, we will not be leaving a bright legacy for the next generation.
Thank you very much.
There was 3 minutes, I hope.
No, it was 6 minutes, 15 seconds.
Progress. There was progress.
Okay, we can move to discuss the second question, which is basically dealing with the most effective strategies or best practices for promoting integrity and preventing corruption in sports organizations. So what could you tell us about this, Andy?
Thank you. And I will, in 3 minutes, try to discuss at least a couple ideas that I have on this, although there are many that we have and many that are needed. One is that when you listen to the litany of enforcement of corruption risks that was just listed, what do you think of in terms of enforcement? What do you think of as the mechanisms that we will use to address these forms of corruption? You think probably of public enforcement. You think of government agencies conducting investigations and prosecuting or settling cases. You think of the engagement of public resources towards this goal, and that is, of course, important and necessary. But I would suggest that we need to move towards understanding that a complement to public enforcement is what you might call private enforcement. That is getting companies who are involved in, or potentially involved, at risk of involvement in these various forms of corruption, to share the costs of prevention, of deterrence, by taking on some of the responsibility to do that in the form of anti-corruption compliance and human rights due diligence. I would suggest that if we think of, we can think of anti-corruption reforms as occurring in 3 phases. One is at the major international governance bodies, FIFA and the IOC and so forth. Another is that the form of sports organizations, whether it's Olympic committees or federations or organizing committees. But notice how those 2 phases of enforcement ignore one additional sector, the companies involved in doing business. Right. What we don't see yet in megasports is an effort to push anti-corruption compliance and human rights due diligence into the network of contracts that make up these events. There will be hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know, of contracts that companies will enter into to put on the 2026 FIFA World Cup, probably thousands. Right? Do those companies have an obligation to adopt anti-corruption compliance measures? Do they have an obligation to adopt human rights due diligence measures? I think we should explore ways to incentivize or encourage or require them to do so. And then secondly, very briefly, This is the second panel that we've had on corruption in sports this week, and the conversation largely focuses on prevention. How do we reduce risk? How do we manage risk? How do we prevent misconduct? I would suggest that we broaden the conversation, and it was just suggested with the concluding sentence, the word legacy was used. Now, legacy is a word that can be used cheaply or loosely, but can megasports leave an anti-corruption and human rights legacy in the host countries, in the countries where the events are occurring? And can we use the anti-corruption initiatives in the corporate sector to leave a legacy both in the corporate sector and in megasports of enhanced awareness of best practices and implementation of best practices? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Emanuel.
Thank you. Best strategies to win this fight against corruption. Well, first of all, I think we need to start by acknowledging that we cannot
feeling of denial, territorial feelings, navel-gazing attitudes will not get us far if we want to win the fight against corruption. And the misperception that I mentioned a while ago is also another symptom of things that must change. But we need to acknowledge positive strides that have been made. But we also need to acknowledge that there is much more to be done. We need to ensure, first of all, that corruption in sport, which is a specific type of crime, is considered a criminal offense on every United Nations member country. This is not the case. Up until recently, corruption in itself was not even a crime in countries like Germany or Switzerland. So we need to confer the dignity and acknowledgement to the problem at the highest level, and that implies criminalization of corruption in sport. And we, SIGA, have just decided this week within our anti-corruption committee to set up a task force specifically to assess and monitor the level of engagement and delivery by governments in this regard. Accountability applies to all, including governments. The second is the adoption of the SIGA Universal Standards, which go from governance, financial integrity, sports betting integrity, youth development, and independent scrutiny that comes with the SIGA independent rating and verification system. The adoption by governments and by the sport movement is the silver bullet, is what demonstrates objectively that sport organizations are fit for purpose to receive the investment in money and reputation by sponsors, by governments, and by all who feel passionate about sport. We need to continue to raise awareness. That is absolutely unequivocal, because it's a cultural phenomenon. And we cannot win this war putting a cop on every street or on every alley. We need to educate, we need to win the next generation and usher sport in this culture of integrity. Governments must to prioritize anti-corruption in sport. And they need to invest. They need to invest the resources, financial resources, so that law enforcement can do their job and can prioritize the prevention and fight against corruption and other crimes that are plaguing sport. But also, they need to confer priority within their national and international regulatory frameworks. And the lack of cooperation that still exists, despite the progress that has been made, and I take my hat off, obviously, to the UNODC, to OECD, to European Commission, but there is still a lot to achieve. And finally, we must, I heard quite frequently the word collective action, but collective action is not just a fancy word. It needs to lead to results. We need to see public and private entities cooperating, because the sponsors here, the broadcasters, they have an undeclinable responsibility and a huge unrivaled weight. They invest their money, they invest their reputation. They are responsible, accountable to their shareholders and the community. They need to be at the forefront, and I'm glad with the progress that we have seen here in dialogue with the UN Global Compact, in dialogue with other umbrella bodies that represent big companies who feel that they also have not just the legitimacy, but the responsibility to safeguard the integrity of sport. I think these are some important contributions that are within our reach and whose time has come.
Thank you very much, Emanuel. And the last speaker on this point is Giovanni, please.
Thank you. And considering what I heard from Emanuel and Andy, I can say that I'm totally in line with them. The first activity we have to do is raise the awareness on the topic. Because I'm registering personally, and I'm saying something of strong, I'm perfectly conscious of this, that around the world there is a tendency to a cultural tolerance of corruption in sport. And that this is the first challenge we have in front of us, a new cultural approach on corruption in sport. We have to consider the corruption in sport as a global threat. What are the factors involved in this definition of global threat? First, sport is the hope of the young generations, probably the most important value in a scale for their development at human level. The corruption in sport has a double this value, so we have the first mission to build a new culture of integrity in sport as a value. Corruption in sport has a double this value. And going to the concrete platform of the multilateralism, the only answer possible we have for this kind of threat is on two directories. The first one is the legal harmonization. We can't maintain distances in our legal national framework in this topic, because if we do it, we give loopholes and possibilities to these criminal groups and criminal interests to align in some space, some legal heavens. On the other hand, we have to reduce distances between the possibility of countries and have an effective response to this threat. And the only possibility we have is to build, through technical assistance and capacity building, new or stronger institutions. But about this I want to speak just a little bit later. Let me conclude with a metaphor. The modern criminality is like a vicious triangle. You have on the top of the triangle criminal groups and criminal interests. And at the basis, on one end, you have the economy and society, private sector, civil society, and markets. On the other hand, you have public administration. Criminal groups are today infiltrating all the bases. On one hand, the socio-economic environment through illegal companies and money laundering, exactly what is happening in sport. On the other hand, they are infiltrating the public administration through corruption. So the key word is infiltration, and the only answer is raising awareness and build a culture of integrity, impeding any form of tolerance of corruption, especially in risk areas as the sport is probably the most important.
Thank you very much. And we have the third question, which we already alluded to. Giovanni that make some references, and Emanuel spoke actually already about this. But my question is, how can governments and international organizations and sports organizations promote integrity and anti-corruption in sport? And the first speaker will be Emanuel. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Well, I think a lot has already been said, not all, but some important stuff has been said. But I would like to avoid leaving an impression that I would be unintentionally launching an anathema over a sector that has so much potential, so much fuel, so much passion, and has such a great global, social, economic, educational, cultural impact. Far from my spirit. So that leads me to acknowledge that the strides have been made. The creation of SIGA was also an important step. The SIGA Universal Standards on Sport Integrity, the SIGA Independent Rating and Verification System, lots of positive work that has been done also by UNODC and by other organizations, give us the encouragement and the incentive to continue to believe that it is possible to turn the corner and transform adversities into opportunities of success. G20 Italy, for example, who was the first time that the G20 acknowledged and elected anti-corruption as one of its top 3 priority, was also almost like a revolution, with positive expectations being generated, which have not been totally fulfilled, especially in the following G20 presidencies, but who's now give Brazil the opportunity to set the record straight and to continue to trailblaze and achieve the objectives in this space. U.S. Congress imposing that every investment above $10,000 must be transparent, must be public, addressing the problems of shell companies and opaque offshore vehicles. CoSP, our gathering here, another great example. The European Commission Directive on Anti-Money Laundering, also encompassing sport as a vulnerable sector, another example. Brazil, G20, with whom we are cooperating, with the government, with the Congress, to shape the future of sport in the country. Enormous progress is being made. But we need to acknowledge that there are things that cannot remain in the same status quo. Because sport does not have the jurisdiction, does not have the legal powers, does not have the knowledge, the expertise, or the resources to tackle a problem, a challenge of public order of this magnitude and gravity as corruption, money laundering, and other global crimes. Therefore, we need a united front. We need the engagement of governments, sport movement, the private sector, global business, whose responsibility are already underscored. But we need also to remind ourselves that governments have an indeclinable duty. And it puzzles me when I look at the OECD 40 recommendations on anti-money laundering and terrorism financing. It puzzles me to see 3 countries in the blacklist and all others on the gray. But none of them, not one single of them, complies with the 40 recommendations. Sport cannot tackle the problem of offshores, the lack of regulation, the lack of scrutiny, these investment funds based in these murky, opaque areas. This is a responsibility of governments. Governments need to assume the responsibility, because otherwise the victims will be sport and those who invest in it and those who feel passionate about sport. I could say a lot more about this, but we need also to confer resources to law enforcement. If they don't do more, it's because they do not have the resources. So governments need to prioritize anti-corruption. They need to confer the means. They need to have, as I was saying, this robust, effective, up-to-date, result-driven, action-oriented international cooperation. And this places a responsibility on all representatives of member states, because the time for action has come, and the time to render accounts to sports organizations, to private sector, is also a matter of urgency. It's a matter of urgency. And if we do not grasp this opportunity, it will be too late.
Thank you very much. Giovanni.
Thank you. Now I have to introduce an argument, and it is like a metaphor, no? An elephant to put on the table. The first obstacle to this kind of interinstitutional and intersectoral dialogue between government and sport is the concept of autonomy and the independence of sport. And we tried in past to have some proposal, and every time we have registered that it is a sensitive issue, because the IOC in its ADN as the independency as an untouchable value. When we go to propose something of so deepening the ruling of life of sports sector, probably we encounter opposition. The only possible answer is to build a co-ownership between public sector, government on one side, and sports organization and movement on the other side, based on the common value of integrity, transparency, and accountability. I think it's not a dream. We can move on this possibility, but every dream, to be not a utopia, to be concrete, needs methodology and also a scientific approach. Probably we have an answer. The technical assistance we have experimented in fighting mafia, turning from the lesson learned and the crisis to an opportunity, then probably work also in this particular challenge. Let me in 2 minutes try to say what is to do. First, enhance the capacity building of the operators. The capability is the base. We can paint a wonderful world, but if the operator is not in condition to apply because he's technically unskilled, we have no chance. Second, sometimes capacity building and capability alone are not sufficient. We have to add the institutional building level approach, because we have to enhance and strengthen institutions to permit to operators to be in line with the expectations. 3, we have to move forward on the legal level, legal framework level, legal building, law building, to harmonize the legal framework at international level. 4th, but last but not least, and it's relevant, we have to build consensus on the values of integrity in sport, as I said before. If you ensure capacity, institutional, legal, and value dissemination, law or consensus building, probably you have the possibility to turn from the threat to the opportunity to go beyond the threat. In Italy, we have built a special statute in fighting organized crime and corruption. And believe me, I'm a magistrate. At the beginning of my career, I had in front of me a mountain to a scale. Nowadays, I can say that the issues are under control. Probably now we have to move to the transnational threat of mafias and cartel and organized crime, because they are involved. But the ancient threat we have solved definitely inside the most of the country. And the answer is in the methodology, in the technicity. And our methodology and our technicity has demonstrated to be probably one of the terms of reference we can use also in the sports sector.
Thank you. And Andy?
Sure. Thank you, Giovanni. I'd like to pick up on a couple of your comments, if I may. You have spoken a couple times about building a legal framework, focusing on the legal framework, and building a consensus around a proper legal framework. And that really ties into the comments that I wanted to make today. I would suggest 3 ways of thinking about the remedies for the issues that are most on my mind, which is the corruption, particularly bribery, and then the human trafficking, the 2 kinds of crime that I think are most salient now in at least mega sports. And first, I would encourage us to think of every host city, every country, as a kind of laboratory. As a laboratory in which we can experiment with new approaches, and we can set precedents that subsequent hosts can follow. We self-consciously think of the sport as the event as a laboratory in which we're experimenting with new methods. I think one country which had a lot of success with this and got almost no recognition for it, I can say it in this context, I'd be very loath to talk about this in a human rights forum, is Qatar. We don't know this because there was no room to talk about it, but in the face of Qatar's systemic labor rights problems, the crisis of labor that was the Qatar World Cup, Qatar in the World Cup experimented with a number of new methods for improving the conditions of labor of migrant workers, and they were largely successful. And I want to share with you actually a quick story that is evidence of this, and probably very few of us appreciate this. I was in a conversation in a meeting with a group of stakeholders to the Qatar event, one of whom was the representative of a migrant labor organization. He was himself a migrant laborer. He was from South Asia. He spoke in broken English. And the conversation turned to legacy. We were all trying to be very civil, and then this representative of this migrant labor workers union raised his hand. He was called on. He slammed his hand on the table, and he said, "You speak of legacy? I will tell you legacy. Legacy is when all workers in Qatar are treated as well as the World Cup workers were treated." And what that comment reflects is, one, there's much work to do in a country with systemic migrant labor issues. What that comment also teaches is that Qatar made a lot of progress in improving the conditions in which the World Cup workers lived. None of us know this because there just wasn't space in the public commentary to talk about it. Okay? But Qatar, I think, successfully used the event as a laboratory. Secondly, I would more deliberately engage national enforcement agencies in innovating, particularly on the corruption side, with how we can use anti-corruption laws and policies and processes that apply in the corporate sector generally to mega sports. Paris 2024 is going to have a very compelling success story to tell about the way they engage their new anti-corruption compliance agency, AFA, to bring new standards to the organizing committee itself and to the companies doing business with the organizing committee. And I think we're going to be able to say after Paris 2024 that there are a number of instances in which new procedures, new norms, new practices have been introduced by virtue of hosting the Olympics, and that will remain in place after the Olympics are gone. I think Paris is going to have a strong case for having left an anti-corruption legacy in the corporate sector. And then finally, I think we need to explore ways to encourage or incentivize private enforcement, as I said. What are we doing? What can we do to get the companies that are doing business with the event to internalize the cost of deterrence? How can we encourage or require them to adopt anti-corruption compliance and human rights due diligence? There are a number of ways we can do so. We need to start working on that. What I think is the third phase of anti-corruption reform.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we went over time. I don't know. I'm looking at the conference services. Do we have a few minutes for a few questions? Well,
Sure we do. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
okay. So yes, please, sir, go ahead.
Deb Sims, I'm a lawyer from Canada. And Professor Spalding, I'm going to start with your point. If I'm a company here in Atlanta, say I'm Coca-Cola, I have to have an anti-bribery and corruption program for all of my books of business, or the federal government will prosecute me. That's a really good anti-corruption measure. And so my question really has two parts. The first part is that not fit for purpose in this space, or is there something different that we need to do about that? And then the second thought is, for extractive industries, we have transparency measures, right? So that we know which oil companies, how much is going into Ecuador, Guinea, and what have you. And could there be something analogous, and this is perhaps for the whole panel, but could there be something analogous in this space?
Yes. Fabulous questions, and thank you. On the notion that U.S. companies are required to have anti-corruption measures in place, I agree to an extent, but not entirely. So there are on companies books and records requirements that govern the way they account for the expenditures and are designed to prevent bribery. But it is commonly assumed, and actually not true, that U.S. companies are under a statutory obligation to have anti-bribery compliance programs in place. That's not the case. There are incentives for companies to adopt compliance programs, but there are not requirements. And so companies doing business in relation to any mega sport event in the United States do not have a separate statutory obligation to adopt anti-corruption compliance. Okay. If we're going to create that obligation, we have to do it through the sport itself and probably through the contracts and embedding these in contractual requirements. Finally, on the transparency initiatives, yes, collective action pacts have already been addressed, but these can we replicate some of these transparency initiatives in mega sports? I think that's absolutely the right road we should be to go down.
At the risk of being executed, I will allow one more question. If there is a wish.
May I just take 30 seconds to complete?
Sure.
Because I think that it was a very pertinent question. And indeed, looking from the outside, it seems that sport continues to be, despite being in the 21st century, it's still governed and operates like we were still in the 19th century. There is no standards applicable to sport, because sport is considered autonomous, self-governed, and with a sense of independency that no other sector enjoys. But this is the beauty of the solution that SIGA brings to the table. We are the sort of organization that has developed a set of universal standards on good governance, which touches anti-corruption, anti-money laundering, democracy, accountability, gender, race, diversity, and inclusion. Second pillar, financial integrity. Third, sports betting integrity. Fourth, youth development. And on top of that, we encourage sport movement to adopt those standards and go through our independent rating and verification system, so that you can have the certainty that those organizations are fit for purpose. And what governments and sponsors and other commercial partners should do is not to put their money and their reputation in organizations who are not willing to have a SIGA certificate that shows them that they are objectively fit for purpose.
Thank you. Since I don't see any more questions, Giovanni wanted to wrap up in 15 seconds.
Yes. Go ahead. If I may, please, I can't conclude this meeting without paying attention to a new form of threat we are registering on corruption in sport. Criminal interests are not interested only to professional sport, but they are also beginning to look to the amatorial one, because criminal groups are in condition to understand where is the base for social consensus, to have the control of territory and society. So please consider also not only a business approach to the sport as a sport industry, but to the sport as movement also, including the amatorial sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is no time for summarizing this debate, and there's probably no need to do this. The only thing I want to say is that I would like to thank you very much for your participation here. It was an honor to be able to discuss with you the issue of the corruption and integrity in sports. Thank you very much, and feel free to pick up some additional information material about IACA. Thank you.